Articuno, Jinx, Nidorina, Beedrill, Haunter, Squirtle, Chansey.
What's up guys, Suris here, and this is going to be a different episode than usual since we're going to be talking about Pokemon. Yes, just Pokemon, trust me. I wouldn't totally use this as a method of subverting expectations, would I? So, for those who don't know, I grew up in the generation where Pokemon exploded. It was on billboards, it was on walls, it was on the internet, you know, the internet we actually had during the 90s. It was all over TV commercials, it was literally everywhere. Pokemon fever hit its peak during my childhood. My private school also sent home letters saying that if children watched Pokemon, they would be burning in hell. Naturally, this meant that I had a lot of Pokemon video games, merchandise, trading cards, and episodes recorded on VHS. Now, for any concerned parents who were buying Christmas gifts for their kids at the time, the Pokemon they might have been most familiar with would probably be Eevee or Pikachu. They were, and still are, the most popular Pokemon of all time. There were even some parents, although they were a little few and far between, that would call all Pokemon Pikachu, as if all Pokemon are Pikachu or Eevee. This obviously is patently incorrect. Anybody who experienced Pokemon in any way, shape, or form knows this to be the case. But even with that, people who grew up loving Pokemon sometimes would say things like, "There are too many Pokemon, how am I supposed to know them all?" Especially after the first 151 released. The answer to that was always pretty simple: you don't have to know them all. But if I tell you that this Pokemon is a Squirtle, you generally accept that it's not a Pikachu. Another thing that would get brought up is whenever Generation 2 came out, or subsequent generations, some people who were used to just the older ones would say, "Aren't there only 151 Pokemon? When did all these new Pokemon show up?" And to that, the narrative the games at least put out was that it's amazing what happens when people discover things, isn't it? When Generation 2 came out, we got to explore the Johto region, and that gave us a whole new perspective on what a Pokemon game could be. Also, isn't it funny that whenever you're playing Pokemon, if your Bulbasaur evolves, it's super easy to call it Ivysaur after it does so? And when it becomes a Venusaur, it's really easy to just call it Venusaur? I've never met that many people who've actually had much of a problem with this. And in Generation 2, when Pokemon were given their genders, or really their sexes, there was some confusion because not all Pokemon actually had one of the binary sexes. Ditto and Magnemite, for instance, were completely sexless. And since the idea of gender expression wasn't something really brought into the Pokemon franchise, we can also pretty much assume genderless. But it's at this point that I get to finally pull the wool away from your eyes and let you know what the real message of this video has been all along. My generation grew up with Pokemon, so these concepts are really quite simple. And as a result, it's really easy to reframe some of these to make gender make sense to those who don't quite understand it. So if we scroll all the way back up, there are some people that think that gender identity is some type of trend, much like Pokemon was. And just as Pokemon has shown its staying power, this isn't something that's just a trend that's going to go away. As people discover things about their identity, they're gonna stick. Except that you live in a world where this is the case. And now I get to go over my previous points that I'm sure originally just sounded like reminiscent monologuing. The first point was that all Pokemon were Eevee or Pikachu. Well, take this to gender. This could be reconveyed as all genders are either male or female, except much like with Pokemon, anybody who's actually experienced any of the atypical genders will know that this is patently false. To the normal layperson, all they might know, just like the concerned parent, is that there are these two genders that we happen to see most often. Just as many parents will see Pikachu and Eevee most often, but that does not mean that those are the only genders that are there. To which one might say, there are too many genders, much like they would say there are too many Pokemon. How are they supposed to know them all? At which point I would respond that you don't have to know them all. Much like with Pokemon, you don't have to know every single one, but if I tell you that my partner is gender fluid, that means that she is not always feeling female. Just like how if I show you this Pokemon is a Squirtle, they are not a Pikachu. You've been given new information. Feel free to utilize it. But aren't there only two genders? When did all these new genders show up? Much like with the aren't there only 150 Pokemon things, it's amazing what happens when you live in a society that allows you to discover these things instead of forcing you into these norms. Imagine a Pokemon fan that was told that they could only ever play the Generation 1 Pokemon games, but nothing else outside of that, even though they might know that there are other games they could play with other Pokemon they could experience. This is the same issue that people run into whenever parents or loved ones, however well-meaning, are doing everything in their power to repress the gender expression that they feel is most apt for them. Also, the point about how easy it was for a Bulbasaur to evolve into an Ivysaur and us to then call it an Ivysaur? If you've been keeping up, that was obviously a metaphor for transitioning. Why is it so easy for people in my generation to call a Bulbasaur an Ivysaur after it evolves, but somehow so difficult for them to call Ted Martha after she tells you what her proper pronoun is? You can accept one in a video game and it's perfectly fine, but when a real-life person is telling you something, it seems to be so much more difficult. Oh, and on the point of everything having a gender? Yep, that was engineered as well, because I happen to have many non-binary friends, and in fact, gender fluidity falls under the non-binary label. I also happen to have more than one partner that identify as non-binary, even though I am a heterosexual cis male, and therefore don't experience any of the dysphoria associated with any of this. Just as, if I didn't play Pokemon, the mere fact that I didn't play it wouldn't somehow change what actually happens within those games. When somebody tells me their proper pronoun, I accept that pronoun and I move on, just as if somebody showed me a Squirtle, I would accept that it's a Squirtle and not a Pikachu. And, by the way, there is a difference between sex and gender. Sex is biological, gender is identity, so don't do your best to undermine somebody's identity just because it's inconvenient to you. What's inconvenient to you might be ripping away somebody else's personal identity to them. So I have a feeling that I'm going to get lambasted in the comment section below for this type of video, and I'm probably going to have at least 100 people unsub from the channel. But you know what? That's fine. All I did was make an innocent video talking about Pokemon, and I found most of the issues about gender pretty easy to understand as soon as I framed them around my understanding of Pokemon. Hopefully these comparisons make things easy for you too if you're having issue. Happy Friday, everyone! Insert end of video tagline here.